Hello, everybody. Welcome to the I'm Not Crazy podcast. My name is Andrew. I am the host. And today with us, we have our guest for this episode, Michael Robert Anderson, once again returning to the show.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears.
Why
your
you
ears.
Dress like a pirate?
Your ears.
Why you dress like a pirate?
Happy Halloween.
Why you dress like a pirate?
Halloween.
Why are you talking like Jack Sparrow?
It's Halloween.
Put the headphones on, please. Thank you. What made you decide to dress up today? It's over. The Halloween special's over. I asked you to dress up for the first episode, and you didn't. And then you come to the first episode of November, which is pre-Christmas Thanksgiving, and you're gonna. Why do you dress like a pirate?
It wasn't coordinated. And I don't think it's a costume. I think it's always Pirate Day. And we should respect the piracy of this pirate.
Respect the piracy of this pirate.
Our-
Well said. So, hello everybody, and this episode is going to be great. As you can see, I'm displaying my glass right up front this time. I had them in the back here. I showed them one episode, and then we just never had them, so I put them up front here. You may have noticed that the thumbnail for the podcast has changed. And it's because a friend of mine, Nick Balsamo, made some fan art for the show, totally unprompted. Leaves me speechless, which is bad because I'm doing a podcast. That's a joke. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So special thanks to Nick. Really
Nick.
fucking appreciate you.
Thanks, Nick.
You know Nick.
I love Nick.
Yeah.
I love
Wow. I just wanted to see how long that would go for.
Nah, once I looked into the lens and made my eyes go sideways, I got really...
Did you actually?
Yeah, ready?
Yeah, no, I know you could do it, Mike. I've known you for a very long time. Okay, so Mike has been a long requested repeat member of the
how we got
cast
here. But
yeah. My dad called me to tell me how much he liked you on the show.
That's wild.
Yeah. He called me and said, hey, that Mike guy. And I was like, yeah. He was like, I like him. I like that guy. You should have him back on. The chemistry is great. And I was like, I appreciated that. I feel the same.
Thanks, Dad.
So on Request of Pops, we got Michael here.
Hey.
And today we're going to be talking about, again, you read the episode title, because if you didn't, that's strange. But today we're going to talk about the Black Knight satellite.
The Black Knight satellite.
Hell yeah.
Is that like the Scooby-Doo episode? That was the first
Black Knight
episode of
satellite.
Scooby-Doo. Like, it's the ghost, Scoob. It was the ghost of the Black Knight. It was like the first...
Oh, the ghost of the Black Knight.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm sure other people played it too. There was a game for the PS2, and you would like go different levels, and the bosses were all the monsters from the show. It was so good, and you would get gadgets
an
and stuff.
N64 version of
Not
maybe
the,
that
it's
one.
not the same one because the PS2 is years later.
I wouldn't say year. Yeah.
I would say years. Yeah.
Yeah. You would know.
Mhm. Yeah.
All right.
So I guess we should just get into the intro of the show then, Mike, if you really want to just ruin things like
I
that.
just want to know about the Black Knight satellite.
Why are there ears in my hand?
I gave you ears. I said, friends, Romans, countrymen.
Oh, lend me your ears. Yeah, and then you gave me the ears.
Right, even though...
Fuck.
Wrong history.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Well, today's episode is... I'm going to be honest with you. This wasn't the original topic. And that might lead to a couple little bits of confusion here and there. Because I wrote this whole episode in 3 days. I did like 2 days of research. Heavy research, though. I got really into this. And I'm not saying it to be like impressive. I'm just it may kind of be jumbled at times. Okay. So just bear with me and let me. I've kind of come up with some things to explain shit.
Okay.
Right. And before we even start, you know what? I'm fucking 13 episodes in. I'm just gonna say it now. Just subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening to it on a podcast app, hit that fucking follow, whatever they call it on the apps. Make sure you hit the bell notification and the like button on all the other apps. I'm sure they have their own bell. Eat plenty of carrots. They're good for your eyes. Even though my mother lied to me. I've had glasses since I was 2. And I always ate my carrots, even though I fucking hated them.
Yikes.
And all I ask is that you just rate it and maybe put a review in, maybe a comment. That's all I ask. Just all 7 of those things. Thank you. Alien. Alien. I wore this hat because it matches this shirt, and this whole thing kind of goes with the theme.
I have a question for you.
Before we even start, holy shit.
Because I was on my way here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know how, like, if you're sitting behind a car in traffic and you're making a left or a right and you got your signal on and your signal's going and the person in front of you is doing the same thing.
But it's...
At the same time, but then somehow they start to go off. Mm-hmm. What is that, you know? Who's doing that? Because time, I'm telling you, time is the same, and then it's...
And then it's
I
not.
look like a crab. I want your opinion on that, because it's always been weird to me that blinkers line up and then they just don't. Unless they're off.
I can't believe you're asking me this question, because you're a musician.
A conspiracy theorist told me to ask you this question.
Who? Now to the intro of the Black Knight Satellite.
Sweet.
Fuck.
Every time.
Fuck. The only episode that I haven't done is episode 12 with Vin, and I know that because he pointed it out. That's how often I do it. I mess up every fucking time. In 1899, a little-known inventor by the name of Nikola Tesla was messing around with a gigantic radio tower in his Colorado Springs lab. He would receive signals from space where he assumed it was Martians counting at him. And for several years after, others have encountered the same signal. As time went on, new evidence would emerge of a satellite orbiting Earth, but it would seem it was anything but earthly. Join us as we talk about aliens, conspiracies, and the birth of one of the most important UFO researchers of their time. It's time for the Black Knight Satellite!
That's the sound of the satellite.
I wrote Black Knight Sat-O-Lita.
That's your vocal warm-ups for the day.
Satellite! Satellite!
What's that Dave Matthews song? Satellite.
I'm a comer. So now, did you understand what I said in the beginning?
So, Nikola Tesla was messing around in Colorado Springs, probably off his ass, and he started getting messages that he thought aliens were 1, 2, and they were counting at him. And then many years later, people also
the jingling is driving me fucking nuts.
And then many years later, people...
It's gone, that's it. It's over.
People would get the same signal, and they'd freak out because eventually it birthed new studies in UFOs. Actually, that sounds really fucking cool.
Yeah, this story is... Okay, so this story is really cool because it involves, like, quite a few several famous people. Like, not famous like fucking Jennifer Lawrence. I'm not, even though her asshole is the only orbit I need. I mean, the actual people, like, the scientists and stuff are, like, the leading scientists of their time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well, I mean, you start with Tesla as the first sentence. It's kind of hey, here's someone that actually made sense.
As for most long-running conspiracy theories, you take what you could find. Information was hobbled together from a bunch of videos, huge thanks to the Y-Files, great videos on YouTube, and a few articles, including a great little story from Vice. It's very short, but it's really well done. It's condensed, it's great. As for the rest, this is all, and there's nothing more to read here. If there was any new information in the rest of this paragraph. I'm only writing this because the section was only 2 sentences, and without it, that would be unacceptable. So what is the Black Knight Satellite?
I would love to know what the Black Knight Satellite is.
It is of supposed extraterrestrial or ultra-terrestrial, wink, wink, spaceship that has been watching Earth for possibly thousands of years. It was said to be a huge black spaceship, which orbits Earth, sending radio waves throughout our history to try and send us a deeply coded message. NASA and other government agencies have been said to cover up the existence of satellites for a range of reasons, from a treaty with aliens, all the way to the aliens are actually running the government and keeping their own ship a secret from us.
Wait, is this the fucking the giant rock that they talk about? What it has a name too. It's like it's like the size of the Empire State Building or something, or maybe bigger than that.
It is a large satellite for a satellite of the time. In the 50s is where it all really started. Okay. And in the 50s, a satellite of this size couldn't go into orbit. We just didn't have the equipment to do it yet. The satellite itself is, they said, about the size of an oil truck. So it's big, but it's not like a huge thing. It could fit maybe 2, ultra-terrestrials, if we want to get into the... So the origins here, okay? So just like anything else, the Black Knight satellite, just like any other extraterrestrial thing that has been discovered or said to be discovered or looked at or researched, whatever you want to say, that object is always being covered up by NASA and government agencies, and it's always for a range of reasons. It just goes from we don't want to scare people because holy shit aliens to, like Biden is just a very old, tired reptilian, I should say. Sorry, Biden.
I don't mean to put my beliefs anywhere, but
wow.
it makes a lot of sense.
I don't want to put my beliefs in, but this is 100% true.
Every person that runs this world
is a fucking alien. As stated in the intro, Nikola Tesla. That's not the right accent at all. That's completely the wrong accent for it. What was he, Italian?
Yes.
Tell me
about him. Tell me.
I'm not going to get into a brief history of Nikola Tesla. I kind of just refuse. Yeah. As the story goes, Tesla was in his lab blowing a large $100,000 investment on random experiments. So it was blowing a large $100,000 investment on random experiments instead of doing what he was supposed to be doing. He was extremely organized and very well put together, but he also just kind of was like, "Oh yeah, no, give me money. Yeah, you want a sophisticated lighting system for your warehouse? Sure, no problem." And then he's just in his thing like, "I'm going to invent radio," and it's crazy. A man by the name of Jacob Astor. Jacob Astor.
I know him. I have a fun fact about him.
Would give Tesla the money to make a sophisticated lighting system for him. It is unclear if he managed to finish said lighting system, but Jacob Astor would go on to die aboard the Titanic, teaching us a lesson that money can't save you on the Titanic.
Yeah, fuck you. That was my fact.
I did a lot of research.
I did it. For some weird reason, my thing when I was 12 years old was just learning about Titanic, in and out, everything about it. I had a book called 881 and a half questions and answered about Titanic because it was 881 and a half feet long. I just could give you the boo boo boo. Just go on down the tunnel, and we're gonna just the rabbit hole, man.
I can't believe that you haven't stopped talking yet. It's unbelievable. Holy shit, Mike, that was incredible. It was like Willy Wonka going through the tunnel. That's what that felt like.
I'm sorry.
Everything started spinning around me, and I'm just sitting here, and he's just going, and we must go faster. And you just go through the fucking the river of chocolate.
The last time I was able to talk about the Titanic with someone was a girl I was on a date with that never ever spoke to me again. And now I know why.
Yeah, because you went on the date and you were like, yeah, so guess what? I had a book when I was younger. It was called 821 and a half pages because it was 821 and a half feet long. I don't know if you know this, but it turns out the unsinkable ship was sinkable.
Oh,
I'll take the salad, please. So anyway, Jacob Astor died. So Tesla would be working on tinkering with a radio tower he had constructed. While doing so, he managed to record a strange radio wave from space. He believed it was artificial in origin. In other words, aliens. He was quoted saying the following. I don't know what he sounded like, so I'm going to just act like he's from Wisconsin. I felt as though I was present at the birth of a new knowledge and the revelation of a great truth. That's what he sounded like, probably, right?
I think so.
Oh. Even now, at times, I could...
That's a different...
I went straight Canadian.
I think he had an Italian accent.
I felt as though I was present at the birth of a new knowledge or the revelation of a great truth. Even now, at times, I can vividly recall the incident and see my apparatus as though it were actually before me. My first observations positively terrified me, as they were present, in them something mysterious, not to say supernatural. And I was alone in my laboratory that night.
I was alone in my laboratory.
Yeah.
My laboratory.
I did say laboratory.
I was alone in my laboratory. You wanted it.
I was born in my room. You're just crying. I look over and you're streaming tears. You look like your fucking dog just died. It's funny because his dog just died.
Just fucking died. My dog is dead.
Okay, Mike.
Fun fact about the Titanic is 15. 1,500 people died.
I'm not even going to try to compose myself. There's no way. After this, the next encounter wouldn't come until 1928, when Jørgen Halls of Oslo, Norway, encountered a radio echo from space. Now, this is a little bit of science for you, and I'm going to explain it the best I can. It's really hard to explain. But a normal echo, okay. Hey, baby boy. Sit down, I'll teach you. Thank you. When a radio wave is sent from one tower to a receiver, that wave causes an echo, which can be heard reverberating from the atmosphere to the ground. That is called propagation. That process takes a 1/7 of a second consistently to happen. The echoes are a 1/7 of a second long. Always. It's a consistent process. Jørgen Halls found one that was going a bit longer than that. And by a bit, sometimes by 15 seconds longer. So it was they're a 1/7 of a second consistently long, and now he's getting a 15-second delay in echo. This is still baffling scientists to this day, who still periodically receive these echoes. We still don't know what these are. This is considered the second time that the radio waves given off by this ship have been picked up.
That's so wild.
Yeah, and there was one before this. I forgot the guy's name, but I found it really late in the research, and I thought I added it, but I didn't. There's actually a second one in between this, but it's basically the same thing. It's just an LDE that was captured early on in, whatever. A man by the name of Donald Keyhoe is next to enter the story. Mr. Keyhoe, at this point, was considered a full-time researcher, being the first of his kind, or one of the first of his kind, paving the way for such researchers as John Keel and J. Allen Hynek.
Whoa!
We love John Keel. All praise John Keel.
Love John Keel.
Later in his life, Keyhoe founded the organization NICAP, which we established in our Woody Darrenberger episode. We separated that, is the National Inquiry for Capturing Ass Pirates, which would go on to be one of the most influential U.S. Research groups of the 60s and 70s.
How could they not? And I
dress as a pirate. Holy shit.
It's almost like I'm involved in actually trying to take this down from the inside.
These things happened in succession, okay? And now these are basically the parts of the story that pad out the foundation of the fucking house we're going to build. We're going to keep using this analogy. There's this foundation, which is this, and then now we're going to get into the frame of the house, if you be. The main construction, if you will. The main kerfloof, if you would. You get what I'm saying?
I got what you're putting down. The wood. And the cement.
Yeah.
And the foundation.
Because it's a house. During an interview with the New York Times, he would begin talking about all the planets in our solar system and how they were able to inhabit life. He would claim that there were, I believe he said it was Mercury, it was very hot. He said, but it would make sense. Now, this is the 50s. This is, space research is in its infancy. It's just basically astrological observations at this point. He would basically claim that, like, in the valleys of Mercury, where it would be cooler, putting Earth logic to a different planet, there would be life there. And he was more or less going from planet to planet, explaining how life would exist there. And then he gets to Mars, and of course, in the 50s, people are obsessed with the idea of Martians and Mars. And when he gets to that idea, he starts to more or less claim some things about Mars and the Martians. He mentioned something interesting when he's talking about Mars, as I said. He claimed 2 artificial satellites were in Earth's orbit and had been spotted by a research base in White Sands, New Mexico. This is even stranger because the first satellite, Sputnik, wouldn't be sent into orbit until 3 years later. A few weeks later, another report would come out in the Times stating a mysterious dark satellite was recorded in Earth's orbit. And this time, the object was said to give off a pulsing radio wave, very similar to the ones that Tesla heard. So, do you know what a sine wave is?
No.
Okay. So, a sine wave is a very, very basic sound wave. Sine wave is like that, right? That is like a no, well, that would be more of a...
that's how we receive sound?
Saw wave.
Is that...
So, that's one of the basic constructions of sound. So, if you break sound down to its building blocks, almost like electrons, protons, but of sound, right? Most sounds are made up of a collection of those sounds layered on top of each other from different aspects of either nature or artificial making. Basically, the sound was very similar to a sine wave. It was a pulsing, like that kind of sound, right? And that radio sound was heard by supposedly Tesla. And that is extremely significant if those turn out to be the same thing, because that's huge.
Yeah.
Then in the 1960s, a few articles would be published again in the New York Times. Then in the 1960s, a few articles would be published once again in the Times, claiming the same satellite was seen soaring the skies, cementing the satellite on the Soviets. This article claimed the Soviets were spying on us using a newly discovered object in Earth's orbit. This would be swiftly covered up by the US government, claiming the object was just space debris and nothing more. But skeptics believed this to be further proof of the elusive Black Knight satellite. So basically, during all of this, all of these things being put out by Mr. Kehoe, Donald Kehoe, the UFO researcher, there are other articles being put out a couple years later or around the same time, also claiming that there is something that has been seen in Earth's orbit. They weren't only happening in the U.S. Also, there are claims from all over the world for a very long time that they have claimed that there was something that was watching them from space.
That's wild.
This isn't a new theory, it's just now given a name. So now we're going to get into probably one of the most interesting people in this whole story, and he is an astronaut by the name of Gordon Cooper. So did you hear how we were all clapping simultaneously at first, and then slowly we all went out because we were clapping at different speeds?
It's different.
That is the same as the blinking in the
They are
the
computers.
lights.
They go at a specific.
Exactly, but they don't go at the same specific.
I'm saying when your blinkers line up with someone, why do they start to...
Okay. So, Gordon Cooper, astronaut Gordon Cooper, Colonel Gordon Cooper. He was an Air Force colonel.
Oh, shit.
He is the next major sighting of the story, and he is one of the most interesting people I have researched so far to just come up in a story that I've never heard about. I encourage you to look up a picture of this man when you can. He kind of looks like the monster of Frankenstein. It's kind of intense how large the top of his head is, but he was said to be extremely cocky. I didn't know this, but apparently in that time, in the 50s and 60s, astronauts were lived like rock stars. And I assume that they had fame and notoriety because they were the first fucking human beings in space, but they had they made a lot of money. They all drove fast cars. They all raced boats. They were all basically James Bond. It's kind of nuts.
If you think about it, in the 50s and 60s, when you're one of the first few human beings to leave the planet, you're God. You're becoming God. That's
exactly. And it's interesting you say that because Gordon Cooper not only was one of the first people in space, but he was one of the first people to do a couple things in space. The video that I watched, the Y-Files, again, I encourage you to go watch that guy's video. Is absolutely amazing. He says straight up, the astronauts that we know of, Armstrong and the other dude and all that shit, they all wouldn't have a job if it wasn't people like Gordon Cooper who were willing to put themselves on the line of science, more or less. Yeah. They put their life on the line to find out if someone was able to even do the things that they would eventually do. Someone had to test those things, and we were racing with the Russians, and unfortunately the Soviets, I should say, sorry. And at the time, the Soviets were moving quickly, and they were using animals and stuff like that, and we had to figure out a way to test it, and we didn't have the knowledge that they were receiving from those tests. So we were kind of stuck, and we had to experiment on people. Yeah. And there were certain people like Gordon Cooper who were willing to do that. The next important sighting comes from a man named Gordon Cooper, as I said fucking hundreds of times. This man was basically NASA's Evel Knievel. He was a totally fearless astronaut that made it possible for future manned space missions. He was the first man to spend a full day in space, sleep in space, and the last to ever be on a solo mission in space. And those were all in the same mission.
Wow.
And during that same mission, a ton of malfunctions caused Cooper to have to manually land his craft from space into the ocean.
Jesus Christ.
And though this would terrify the normal person, Cooper was completely unfazed and continued to go into space and looked forward to it. Again, a fact that I found out from the Y-Files. He is the only astronaut to ever fall asleep while the shuttle is being put into orbit. He fell asleep during liftoff.
Good for him, man.
How crazy is that?
He's done. 50s and 60s, he probably just got out of the Korean War. He was looking for something to do. So maybe.
Yeah, so he might have been. I didn't look that. I didn't even realize.
Imagine not
he
knowing.
He was young, so I don't think he was in World War II.
Imagine not knowing that like gravity makes you float, and you're just asleep, and you wake up floating. And you're just like.
So like they knew certain things going into it, just because they were able to deduce them through just observation and stuff like that, and do testing. Yeah, but the one like interesting things that you don't think about, like blood flow and getting blood pressure to go to your legs when there's no gravity to put it to your legs, like things that you don't think about.
Yeah.
That they had to figure out with him. Like there was a point where he said, "My legs are going numb," and they had to adjust his body in the craft. And when they did, they realized that his legs were working correctly. And that's kind of why when you see astronauts work, they don't work standing up floating. They work like this floating because it helps with the blood flow, because it doesn't have to go down, it goes across.
Yeah, they lay flat.
So like there's little things like that they had to learn, and they just didn't. I'm sure there's things they didn't even think about that came up because why would they ever have to think about them?
This was the first thing I wanted to do when I was a kid. Like
be an astronaut?
Astronaut, that was it.
You know what's really interesting? I don't think I'd go to space. I'm terrified of space. Space for some reason scares the fuck out of me.
Yeah, absolutely.
To a point that if I have a VR headset, if I put that on and I put space on and I'm like floating above Earth, it creeps me the fuck out.
Let me tell you the craziest, most humbling experience ever. When I was on the ship, they would let us out by the front of the ship so you can see. And when it was nighttime and there's no lights, no anything around you, it's just like space. And it was the most terrifying thing.
Yeah, it's so scary.
But the most fascinating. Did you hear what William Shatner said about his trip to space? He said it was the saddest thing he's ever done.
Because he knows no one else would be able to do it.
Because he says it makes you realize what you're missing on Earth. And it's just the emptiness of everything. That's to be alone in space. Imagine Ridley when she killed all the aliens and she was just floating around, man.
That was a movie. Yeah, that was a movie.
What are you talking about?
I'm not doing this with you, Michael.
What are we talking about?
Alien.
Yeah, when Ridley fought the alien in space.
Is that Aliens?
Alien and Aliens.
She didn't win at the end of Alien.
No, the Aliens when she had the.
Yeah. All right.
Let me just crack my nose real quick.
So while he was in space, right? He's in his capsule. He goes up to space. He spends the night. I believe it was 34 or 36 hour. He spent the night in space, slept there. On his way back, malfunctions happened, and malfunctions were happening throughout the entire thing. Apparently, he had to shut off his autopilot while falling through the atmosphere. Shut off his autopilot and manually find water and land in it while in the capsule, and he did it perfectly calmly, no problems. Absolute rock star. It's amazing. But it would be during this exact flight that Cooper would report seeing a glowing green object in front of him, which was confirmed by his ground crew, and was seen moving in retrograde in Earth's orbit. Once landed, media naturally swarmed Cooper, but were told very specifically not to mention the sightings at all by NASA. They then claimed a malfunction in the capsule released a large amount of CO2, causing Cooper to hallucinate, successfully stomping out the story. And Cooper agreed with the government's stance for years, until he retired. Once Cooper retired, he would begin claiming that he had been seeing UFOs on many occasions during his time in the Air Force, and throughout his career, he claimed the government was knowingly suppressing a knowledge of UFOs, and he had done the same for them, claiming that he was more or less following orders. Up until his death, Cooper swore that he had saw what he saw and that there was an active cover-up by the government covering up UFOs, and, all the things that came out a couple years ago is what this man has been talking about since the 50s. I mean, because it's one sighting, it's very quick, but it's by probably one of the most credible people that you could get at that time to give you that information. Like if there was a person that would be fit to talk about Mars, it will be Neil Armstrong. It's not... Neil Armstrong?
Yeah, no, Neil.
Not Lance. Lance is the one ball cheating bitch. But yeah, he more or less, if you needed to know about the moon, you would go to him and you would trust what he has to say about the moon. Yeah. Fun fact, he's also said he's seen aliens. So it's all of these people who have been to space, the amount of them that have come out and said that they've seen aliens after coming back, it's kind of intense. It's really like the ratio is very high.
There are a lot of sightings happening lately, and a lot of retired people in the military.
It's super cool. Don't get me wrong. It's super cool, right? But on the flip side of that, even though they are credible, there also is the fear anytime that I listen to someone like this speak, or someone that goes a little crazy with it and starts to claim like outrageous shit, is they are retired and they want to make money.
Yeah.
And they were, no matter what, at the end of the day, they were government scientists. They're not making a fuck ton of money. So they're now just retired government scientists who are making a modest pension. They want to make more money. And the flip side is they are credible, and they know they're credible. So they know that they could sell books.
Yeah.
That was a really hard sentence to get out.
But you got it.
I did.
You got there.
The next sighting takes place in 1973, Michael.
Whoa, that's like crazy, because that's 1973 is a different year.
In 1973, a Scottish author and researcher named Duncan Lunan decided to do a little digging on those LDEs heard by our old friend Jorgen Halls. So he found the recordings and said, let me dig into that a little bit more. He was not a scientist. He is an author and researcher, but he's kind of one of those people that has been doing it for so long that he's considered, like, he knows what he's talking about in the area of radio phenomenon and radio waves and stuff like that.
What a great name.
Duncan Lunan.
And he's Scottish.
Duncan Lunan. Duncan Lunan. Duncan
Decided to
Lunan.
do a little digging.
While reading the reports, he started to see a pattern and felt like there may be a hidden message in the signal. This is, again, the signal from Jorgen Halls. And in an article for the British publication, Spaceflight, he claimed to have found just that. According to Lunan, if you were to plot the points out of the LDEs, you're left with dots on a page. When those dots were reversed, they seemed to be a very clear sky map of the constellation Boötis, I forgot how to say it.
So it was a star map. It was basically a constellation is what their interpretation mapped out.
The way that the pages are lined up, from what it looks like when I was looking at the paperwork, right, is the test has a page with a bunch of boxes on it. And it seems like the box is more or less, it's like every interval of time, you check that box when it gets to that point. So there would be multiple sounds, and then you could see how long the delay was. And it would chart out onto this, more or less like this graph, right? And when he charted it out, it looked like almost kind of like the silhouette of Staten Island. Like it was like bam, bam, here, and then one here. And it was that, right? And he originally tried to compare it to a bunch of constellations, but got no matches. So he figured, he reversed the polarity of the image because it's space. You could do that. You could spin it any way you need to make it fit. It's a 3D model. Yeah. So he spun it around, and sure enough, when he spun it around, it fit closely to this constellation, but not exactly. So Lunan didn't stop there, though. After finding the same star map hidden in other signals recorded in 1929 France, Lunan felt he needed to dig deeper. He also felt like the small differences between the actual constellation and his mysterious star map wasn't an error, but instead a sign. Due to the process called axial precession, stars located in the sky will appear to change due to the Earth's axis moving slightly over time. This could cause the map to be slightly off in 1973. So, more or less, this actual axial precession, right? What that is the Earth is on its axis. And over the course, I believe it's 21,000 years. Every 21,000 years, its axis will make a full rotation, right? But because of that rotation, every time it's slightly off from where it was the time before. Yeah. So because of that, the night sky will be slightly different throughout the years. And what scientists will do is they'll take constellations recorded during a time, and if they have to date that, they will use those star maps to figure it out using axial precession to figure out the precise time of where those stars are.
When that signal was sent from, because they can date that too, go as far back as, the cavemen were here when that signal was sent.
Exactly. And after following the constellation's location through time, just as we said, Lunan concluded two things. One, the satellite was precisely 13,000 years old. And 2, there was a message hidden in all the new data as well. It read as follows, quote, "Start here. Our home is in Epsilon Boötes, which is a double star. We live on the 6th planet of 7, coming from the sun, which is the larger of the 2. Our 6th planet has 1 moon. 1/4 planet has 3. Our 1st and 3rd planets each have 1 each. What? Our probe is the position of Arcturus, known in our maps."
That's insane.
So basically, just
though.
explains the solar system that he lives in, yeah. Or
Then-
she,
but then
or
the-
it, or they.
Then it becomes, oh, is it real or not? But it almost, this to me seems almost like the science is literally pointing there.
And to Lunin, it did seem the same. And to be fair to him, this entire time, he is an actual, again, he is not a scientist by profession, but he takes the scientific method seriously. And in the moment, it really was like, holy shit, I just discovered something. And in his writings, in his publications, he's very, very quick to say, like, take this with a grain of salt. This is just scratching the surface, but this is what it seems like from where I'm at. Mm-hmm. And he was very, very quick to be like, listen, this could be not necessarily correct,
right,
but this is where I'm at. And this story would be picked up by major news publications and became a big story. And for a long time, it was considered a fun conspiracy theory. That was until 1998, when photos of the Black Knight satellite were supposedly captured by the STS-88 mission.
Oh shit, I want to see that.
After all these years, a photo of the mysterious object was available to the public. This was, of course, immediately blamed on a lost thermal blanket that was drifting around in our orbit. The U.S. government claims that the picture taken, there's a set of, like, a whole bunch of pictures of this debris. There's pictures from far away, up close-ish, different angles, and from certain angles, 100% looks flat, looks like it could be some type of blanket. But from other angles, it looks straight up like a spaceship. That is the bulk of the lore of the story. So now we're going to get into what the fuck, how this story came together. So why is it here? Sightings of the satellite are still going strong, with people all over the world claiming to see it even to this day. Going back to ancient times, the idea of seeing this floating thing in space, or in the sky, I should say, is real. And for those thinking, oh, you won't be able to see a satellite from space, we could see the International Space Station from Earth. And not only can you see it, but you could see it very clearly because it's just a little bit bigger in terms of the angle that we see it at as what this ship would be. The Black Knight satellite has become a staple in UFO and conspiracy lore, but why is it here? Well, there are a few possibilities.
Why?
So, the satellite is extraterrestrial, sent here to monitor us. This includes both a nefarious and friendly intention. The first, obviously, is that the satellite is extraterrestrial in origin, and more or less the ancient aliens theory, that aliens put this probe here to monitor us. If you ever watch Ancient Aliens, humans have never done anything themselves. Everything has been, literally every fucking event, there's 20-something seasons. Every event of this show, of human history in this show, is claimed to be done by an alien. We are the dumbest things on ever because we can't do anything ourselves. They did everything for us.
And then the Greys came.
That's the first theory.
Okay.
The second theory is that the satellite is ultra-terrestrial in origin, also being used to monitor. So now these are just theories that I found, and then the ultra-terrestrial theory, obviously, I put in because it's me. But more or less, this theory would be that a future version of humans came back to put a probe so that they could get like actual events happening in real time.
Yeah, that's their history. That's their history class.
So more or less the same as if we could go back in time and take a picture of Abraham Lincoln getting shot, or like, you know, the unveiling of the Statue of Liberty, and like just specific crazy events in history. Like if we could go back and take a picture of it. Did there a picture of the unveiling of the Statue of Liberty?
Yeah, I think so.
When was it given to us? By France?
1888, 1886, something like that. 1886, I think.
Number 3. The satellite could be old human technology left behind by a long-gone race of advanced humans. The idea is that there were human races on Earth before we were here, but we more or less got to a certain point of advancement and fucked ourselves over and nuked ourselves, And because of how nuclear waste works, eventually the Earth is totally safe and will come back to life, as long as the planet itself isn't destroyed. And that's what seemed like, people believed happened.
That's the entire lore of the Assassin's Creed games.
Basically, exactly.
Which is one of the coolest, ideas.
I love this idea.
Yeah.
Do I believe it? No, but I love it. I think it's cool as fuck. But basically, the idea is that the past humans left this here as not a probe to watch us, but as a hint of how to get to them when we get to a certain point of advancement, so that we could get out the same way that they were able to. So almost like them looking out for us for the future of humankind. Like they left this star map here, like, hey, this is where we're at. When you're able to get this, when you're able to interpret it, come find us.
So maybe you can mix that with the idea of them being ultra-terrestrial, because maybe they are from the future because of being able to
It could
go
all
back
kind of
in the past.
mishmash into one, realistically. Any of these could
it's a
also be
simulation.
working with each other. That's a whole different episode. If you get me on that, this episode will be 4 hours. Part 4!
Or
Number 4. The satellite is part of a world government plan to thin the population in order to make it easier for them to take over the world's supply of wealth and absolute power.
That's it.
Of course, that has to be there. As Kanye would say, the Jews. And then number 5, and I don't, love the Jews. It's just what Kanye would say. Of course, all jokes aside, there is every single conspiracy theory, especially ones that have to do with UFOs and aliens, all boil down to the Jews every time. It has been a joke on Last Podcast for years. It's been a joke in the alien community for years. It always ends up being the Jews' fault. Maybe they're just trying to live past the massive amounts of mass
the
death that has been put on them. Number 5.
Burger King food.
It's all fake. That's the other possibility. This is all fake. Well, now that we know the story and the possibilities of why it would be here, what actually happened?
What happened?
Now, Mike, I'm sorry.
Uh-huh.
I've been a little bit misleading.
Why?
This story's kind of bullshit. The whole story's pretty much bullshit.
Whoa.
I'm going to systematically now, event by event, tear down everything that I've talked about.
Oh, that's
You ready?
crazy. No.
You ready?
All right.
Sorry, guys. I'm going to tear you down now. I had to tell this story as if it was 100% true, because how else can you tell the story?
Great storytelling.
Thank you.
You did a great job.
Thank you. It's all fake.
Yeah, I'm upset with you.
So, okay. There are, I will say, just like any story, there are bits and pieces that I will concede and say they're pretty cool. And we're going to get to those. But they're very sprinkled in between a big fucking sundae of shit. Now, if this entire story sounds like a list of unrelated stories in history, you'd be 100% right. Most of the stories told have legitimately nothing to do with the others, with most of the supposed sightings being added retroactively to the lore of the story. So, Tesla, Jorgen Halls, Gordon Cooper, Kehoe, Donald Kehoe, all of those people, Duncan Trussell.
My favorite.
I would love. That's a dream guest. That's like top 10 dream guests.
We'll get him.
He'd be great. Get in touch with Duncan if you see this. Let's get him on. So every one of those stories has been added specifically because the descriptions of the object are all intensely vague.
Yeah.
There's no real description other than glowing green or black object.
And that's the thing. There was no glowing green until you mentioned Gordon Cooper. And
Exactly.
at that point, I was like, Michael, let's put on your detective hat.
Now, skeptics will look at that and say, well, we're not looking at it up close. We're looking at it from Earth. So maybe there is a hue that we don't see because of the atmosphere. There is also no consistent description of the satellite, as I said, as it was usually not seen at all. The first 3 sightings aren't even sightings. They're just a guy fucking got radio waves in lab. They didn't see anything. So let's go through this point by point and see how much is actually left at the end. As cool as it sounds for Tesla to have been the first to encounter the strange craft, it is widely believed Tesla was actually just the first to encounter a pulsar. I'm going to read this first, and then I'm going to explain it the best I can. A pulsar is basically a neutron star spinning rapidly on its axis, causing its magnetic poles, the north and south, to emit an electromagnetic radiation, a beam of electromagnetic radiation from the spinning effect. This could be observed through pulsars, but only when the electromagnetic radiation is pointing towards Earth, kind of like a lighthouse. When you're looking at a lighthouse, the light is only visible when it's on you. When it's not on you, you may see the streak if it's foggy, but otherwise you don't see light. This causes a pulsating sound, which could sound artificial to someone before the year 1968, which is the year that Jocelyn Bell identified pulsars. And she is extremely interesting. I went on a tangent about this woman. She is a brilliant scientist who works with pulsar. She identified pulsars for the first time, but she's just worked with radio waves and like high-end, very sophisticated like science, including the science of sound. And she is extremely, extremely important to history, and I've never heard her. So shout out Jocelyn Bell. She sounds fucking great.
Yeah, hell yeah, Jocelyn.
So these could very easily be identified as artificial in nature due to the sophistication of the equipment needed to truly identify them as a natural occurrence in nature. So more or less, Tesla couldn't have known that they were natural because he just didn't have the equipment to understand what he was receiving.
Yeah.
So to him, it sounded like a pulse of equipment or electricity. But that's not necessarily what it is. It technically is in a way, but it's the sound reaching us. So I'm going to try to explain what this is, right? So you have a neutron star. Shout out Jimmy. It has a set of poles. So imagine if this is a round star, right? The top is the North Pole, the bottom is the South Pole. It is spinning rapidly. But again, because the axis isn't totally straight, it's a little curved, it spins like this, right? So now imagine, as it's spinning, there is a beam of light shooting out. So like a flashlight, right? So it's going like this. So you could see the beam of light is only where it is when it's there. And every time it goes over Earth, we hear the sound. And every time it goes away, it goes away. And because of the Doppler effect, when you're going around, it goes over Earth and you hear the pulse and then it comes off. So what it's doing is going...
And it sounds artificial.
And it sounds like equipment.
Yeah.
So basically, just because of the time he lived, he couldn't have identified that. And I was actually wrong in the beginning. I said that the second sighting, the one that I forgot to mention, was also a long delay echo. It's not. It was actually also a pulsar.
Okay.
The only long delay echoes from what I know of are Jurgen Hall's and the ones from France in 1929 when that happened. As for Jurgen Hall's, as we said, the answer isn't quite as simple as it is for Tesla and the other dude. So what he heard was a long delay echoed or an LDE. So when you're listening to an echo, what they're measuring when they say delay, if it's going from here to here, it takes it's measuring the amount of time it takes from the echo of when it hits here reaches back to this. And where these LDEs come from is still a total mystery. They are so mysterious that the best that we have right now to explain it is a list of 5 theories, which comes from a list of 15 theories, which could all be also pretty equal things. It's just that these are the ones they feel like could all be equally responsible for the signals, if this is the case. In other words, they could be from an artificial source, but the odds are that just like pulsars, they're an unidentified natural phenomenon. And we will eventually figure that out, but for now, it's a mystery to us. This is something that, unfortunately, just because it's in space and we don't know what's causing it, does not mean it's an alien.
Yeah.
And anytime a headline comes out or something comes out saying that something has been discovered in space, a sound or a picture, the picture of the crater on Mars, where everybody said it was a face, all of these things are just... we're scraping the surface. We just don't have the equipment to go further, but we could just recognize it, but we can't go further than that. It just is what it is. You know, it does not mean it's aliens.
It's going to take time. Yeah.
Let's get into the Donald Keyhoe articles. We're moving through this fast. The Donald Keyhoe articles in the 1950s are a little less impressive with context. So it turns out that Keyhoe was writing a book at the time involving UFOs and the idea that ancient aliens had been probing the Earth for millions of years. Most skeptics believe that these news stories were just clever ads for the book and not actually an actual sighting of anything. He wrote a book, and it seems like the New York Times thought it would be cool to write an article like tongue-in-cheek, more or less like kind of shitting on him, but doing it sarcastically. And they did it so well that people believed it, more or less. That's what skeptics believe. Me personally, I don't think that's the case. How can I put this? Before Donald Keyhoe, the modern idea of a ufologist.
An ufologist. Get it right.
The idea of an ufologist, of them making a living and like traveling and speaking, was not a thing.
Unheard of.
Right? He was the first of his kind. When you're the first of your kind with something like this, is that usually because there isn't you couldn't get into it from anyone else. So you had to start it.
Yeah.
From what we're seeing, most of these things are bullshit. And I truly do think that Donald Kehoe is just one of those ufologists, that wrote a book to make money and was on a media campaign, a marketing campaign, just like a self-help book. If a guy that has all of his money from selling a book telling you how to make money, the book is not going to tell you how to make money, because then why would he have written the book? Why wouldn't he have just done that and made his money that way?
Yeah.
It's the same fallacy over and over, and he falls into the same thing.
To me, he seems like one of the original tabloid writers.
He's a shiesty motherfucker, as they say in the streets.
As the streets, but they don't say it in the sheets, because that would sound like you're a shitty motherfucker, and then the person would be offended.
Little John. So, I thought you were going to throw... That is fucking... Why did you just do that? This is the weirdest thing. And you know what's crazy? For years, we said that my dad looks like Mr. Bean, and my dad's the one that asked you to come on the show. We live in a simulation.
Hi, Dad. You want to hear something really, really funny?
Sure. Does it have anything to do with this?
Well, no, it has to do with Mr. Bean, with Rowan Atkinson. My friend growing up, my friend Mason...
He's deaf, so no shout-outs to Mason.
This is like his second cousin or something.
Cool.
They're related.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Now, we've gone through the 50 sightings and early sightings. So now we're going to get into more of the meat of the story. So we're going to get to Gordon Cooper. Okay? Though the Gordon Cooper story is great, it does actually seem that he did have a gas leak that did cause Cooper to hallucinate. Considering Cooper backed all of his sightings except this one. Cooper even says, nah, I was just breathing in gas. Yeah, like this man just said, like, I believe that I've seen, like, I don't know about hundreds, like 50 alien sightings. This isn't one of them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the way this works, right, is if he himself claimed this was not a UFO, but instead claimed that it was CO2-induced hallucinations, we have to take his word for it. Because if you're going to take his word for the other ones that he claims are true, then you also have to take his word when he says something that you don't like to. You can't just say you believe the stories of him seeing them and then also say he doesn't know what he's talking about when it comes to this one. Because that is conflicting information. So if you're going to believe that he saw a UFO, then you have to believe that this one isn't true because he himself said it. And if you don't believe that that is true, then you can't believe anything else he said. So at this point, why even listen to Mr. Gordon?
Do you believe in life after love?
Yeah. Now on to our friend Duncan Lunan.
Duncan Lunan.
And again, remember in the beginning when I said this story has a ton of famous people?
Yeah.
It's kind of done that way on purpose to make the story interesting. They just cherry pick the famous person that saw something of that year and put them in the story. It's very... now that you see it, when you take a step back and you're out of the mist of holy shit aliens, you're like, wow, that's really dumb. This story is so stupid.
Yeah.
Like, if you were listening this whole time, like, excited, like, holy shit, this is real, you're a fucking moron.
It's told great.
Go fuck yourself. Why are you here? Get out of here, you fucking stupid idiot. Subscribe, you fucking morons. So now to our friend Duncan Lunan. Duncan Lunan. The man that decoded the Black Knight satellite messages.
The man that decoded the BTA.
Yeah, the BTK messages.
Do you guys accept floppy disks?
Can you trace a floppy disk? No.
Well, I bet I can.
Sure. And you know what the best part is?
LDE.
They technically didn't lie to him. They didn't trace the floppy disk. He left the metadata for his church in there, and they were able to link it to him at the church that he worked at.
What a Dennis, you fucking idiot.
Dennis, you fucking moron. I'm going to write him and tell him he's still alive.
Asshole. I'm going to send him a...
He's kept in the same prison as the Unabomber. So now, again, to our friend Duncan Lunan, the man that decoded the Black Knight satellite messages. Unfortunately, just 3 years later, in 1976, 3 years later, Duncan would more or less retract his entire original claim, citing huge errors in calculation and a lack of scientific method. Though, once the photos were released in 1998, he did reinterpret the messages and felt that Epsilon Boötes was the origin of the message.
Oh
but, of course he did, because that's right after the photos came out and there was media attention again, and I think he wanted to make money.
Oh, I'm relevant again.
And then that just leaves us with the photos themselves. And again, depending on the one that you choose to look at, depends on what you see. There's the classic photos, But all of the other ones do clearly show a small flat object floating through space that looks much more like a space blanket than a satellite. And NASA has actually specifically explained which space blanket it is, and there is a record and a video of them losing it. So we know that they are not lying.
So there is a space blanket in
This
space.
is a space blanket in space. Who would have thunk?
I would have.
You know, it would have been weird to have a space blanket on Earth, because we're not in fucking space, are we? Get out of here.
But what is the space blanket to like keep us nice and cozy?
No, I believe it's radiation. It has radiation. For those unaware, right? The atmosphere protects us from like rays coming from space, like things coming from space. So it protects us from specific like things from the sun. Mice. In the last century alone, reports of a mysterious satellite have come out of almost every country on Earth, with governments confirming these reportings. Certain governments, I should say. There are even stories about a young Jacques Vallée, and this was one of the most important ufologists to come out of this time period. When I said that in the intro, this is who I meant. I was not talking about Donald Kehoe. Fuck that little bitch.
What a loser.
The story of Jacques Vallée is fascinating. Supposedly, he was working at an observatory in France when he received a message, like a radio wave. He claimed that these excited him and his crew a ton. Like, they got super excited because they were like, oh, what is this? This is like totally out of the ordinary. And when he brought it to the senior member of his team, everything was deleted and they were told that they shouldn't talk about it.
Oh, good.
And being one of the first events that would eventually begin his very successful career as an ufologist. And Jacques Vallée is probably next to John Keel as one of the most important conspiracy UFO-ish writers of all time. He's
pretty big name.
It could be one of the most influential. And what's the reason for that is, if you've ever, he's still alive. He was on Rogan recently. Like, the reason that Jacques Vallée is so important to the study of this is that Jacques Vallée is a government worker who is intensely friendly and social. Like, he comes across so normal that he doesn't seem crazy, and he does approach things from a scientific angle for the most part. This was his first step into saying not necessarily aliens are real, but more or less there is something being covered up. But what he did say, I will say, is that he does not feel like these were coming from an alien source. He feels like the observatory was embarrassed that they didn't have the equipment to identify it. So they figured, let's just act like we didn't get it at all, so we don't have to have the responsibility of identifying it, because we can't. But believe what you can, you know? So in conclusion, at the end of the day, this story is impossible to debunk completely due to the fakeness of the satellite itself, which has lent credence to the length of the story's age. I don't know if that makes sense. If a dark object is seen in the atmosphere anywhere on the planet, it could be attributed to the Black Knight satellite. It doesn't make a difference on the shape. As long as it's dark, it's the satellite. And it makes it a template for a very broad conspiracy idea, which boils down to the same thing as it always does. The government is hiding aliens. Do I believe in the black satellite? Not really. But it was a really fun story and idea. The thought of an advanced alien race monitoring us for thousands of years is both fascinating and terrifying. But until then, look into the skies and wave to the Black Knight satellite. That's it. That's the end.
Whoa. So the Titanic,
This is one of those stories. It's like, it's kind of like chemtrails, where it's super interesting when it's mysterious, because everything that's being told to you sounds like it could be true. And then when you just read about it, it's like, wow, I just didn't know anything about how this works. And then when you read about how it works, you're like, oh, that is just impossible.
It's so
cool, like chemicals from planes can't reach the surface from the altitudes they would have to be dropped. It just doesn't work that way.
I know when you're crop dusting, your planes are very low, and we see them.
Exactly, and that's the debunking right there, Michael.
Right there.
But once again, thank you to Mike. I appreciate you coming back on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, our resident alien man. And once again, if you want to go ahead and follow Mike, this stuff will be on screen. And make sure you please rate, subscribe, hit the thing. Make sure you get the things, and you put all the things in the things so that you can listen to the thing when the thing's out on the things. Have a great one. I am obsessed with you. I watch you through your window while you shower. I love you, and you have a good one.